Anna Robinson, founder and CEO of Ceresa. Today we're going to be talking about the importance of human-centered design as we create leadership and development programs, particularly for diverse employees. We also know that in the current crisis we all find ourselves in, and I'm sitting here desperately hoping that my kids and dogs aren't going to run through at any minute, this topic of really addressing the whole person and understanding what individuals need is more critical than ever. We really applaud a lot of the work that we're seeing different companies do right now, not only looking at virtual programs, but also looking at how to include much more holistic resources, such as mental health resources, in order to support their people, their teams through this difficult time and the future economic uncertainty. Just a quick note that we decided to do a recording of this session to avoid any potential risks with bandwidth or any of the Zoom hacking that's going on, but we're absolutely here live as well and available for Q&A. Any questions you want to chat through during the recording, we'll try and address and be here live for Q&A at the end, so happy to connect then. I want to also introduce my friend Layne, who's joining us to talk through some real life examples based on her couple of decades of experience in the L&D space.
Thanks, Anna. I'm Layne Greer, and as Anna mentioned, I've worked in learning and leadership development for decades, although luckily only 2 of them. And I have been really privileged to work for some incredible organizations such as Starbucks and Gap Inc., so mostly in retail. And as many of you know, retail leadership pipelines start out incredibly diverse when you think about hourly employees who start to move through their career and over time be promoted to manager roles, etc. But unfortunately, that healthy diversity that we start out with doesn't always translate to the most senior roles within an organization.
One of the core things we need to do with human-centered design is to really start with the human, understanding the context and what's going on. So let's start today with a story. Imagine a young woman, Anita. She's in her early 30s, recently married, and they're at a point of deciding whether to have children. Anita recently moved to a new city because of her husband's work, and she's working as a product manager on a new team, and she's part of, it's a pretty large, well-renowned tech company. Anita's been a manager already for a couple of years and has received pretty great feedback on her potential throughout her career. But as she starts thinking about her professional path forward, she's not sure anymore that she can really achieve her professional goals and also show up as the kind of mother she wants to be. And as she thinks about it more, she doesn't even really know anymore what she does want to do with her career. She's liked her job well enough, but she's found herself kind of living weekend to weekend more recently. And while Anita's really passionate about tech, she doesn't feel like she even understands the potential paths that she could take in her career. Anita used to really think that one day she'd be a CMO or even a CEO, but she's not confident anymore that that's even possible for her. She doesn't feel like she's had much opportunity to advance past the manager level. She hasn't really received much feedback from people on things she should be doing differently. And despite having worked really hard throughout pretty much her whole career, even all the way back to high school, she's still feeling pretty dissatisfied and doesn't know where to even start on having conversations with people on this topic. You know, her family, her parents were both teachers, so they don't have a lot of that professional context to guide her. Other than a couple of her college friends, she doesn't have an extensive network to chat through. And while she's got obviously her supervisor at work, she's had pretty challenging conversations there where she's often the only woman and has felt pretty intimidated. She also has found that while she was assigned a formal mentor in the workplace, she never really connected and wasn't totally sure if it was confidential, and certainly hasn't seen that as a place she can go have these discussions about the future of her career. This story of Anita is not really a story. It's based in examples we see over and over again at Ceresa amongst the hundreds of participants. It's an incredibly common situation that we're seeing. To start thinking about ways that we can help people like Anita, we need to really understand a bit more about what's going on, where the problem is, and what's behind that. We know that at the top of the career ladder, there's still a really persistent diversity problem. If we just look at Fortune 500 CEOs, typically 5 to 6% are women and less than 1% are Black or African American. When we go all the way back to the entry-level positions, there's actually almost even gender representation at entry-level positions in professional companies. Yet we know this is not just a C-level problem. Even though a lot of people put all the focus there in trying to address more diverse leadership, actually we need to look at this mid-career period, what's become known as the broken rung. women and underrepresented groups are stalling and really falling behind much earlier in their career. We know that women's own aspirations to senior leadership positions actually drop off within less than 5 years of being in the workforce, falling from almost half of women aspiring to senior leadership to only 16% in less than 5 years. At the same time, for every 100 men that are promoted to first-time manager, only 72 women are promoted. So these places where women and underrepresented groups are falling behind is not just at the top of their careers. We need to look at it at this mid-career period. So let's understand a little bit more about what's going on during this period. Let's start with the fact that the transitions we're making in this mid-career period are tough in and of themselves. First-time manager, director, VP, they require pretty different skill sets, much more strategic thinking, learning how to take more initiative yourself, starting to inspire versus directly manage, and the tone of the communications as a leader is so different as well. I see those as almost these big hurdles that we have to learn to overcome. Yet it's more than that, especially for women in underrepresented groups. This is where, to me, the metaphor of the tough mudder races becomes really real. Not only do we have these big hurdles to overcome, but there's other things going on at the same time that makes it even harder for some people. We know that for women, there's considerable bias built into many places in the workplace, including performance reviews or how they get new roles. In performance reviews, women typically get 1.4 times more critical subjective feedback than their male peers do in performance evaluations. Women only apply for new jobs when they meet a much higher bar of the requirements listed for the job than they do their male colleagues. Imposter syndrome starts to become a greater issue, and we see that at this point, men do get promoted more quickly than women. Even outside of the work setting, what's going on at this period in the personal context is often much more complicated, especially for women. This period happens to coincide with when a lot of women are dealing with greater responsibilities at the home, and we know that even in dual income households, women still bear the largest burden of performing those additional tasks, being both mentally and time consuming. In this difficult mid-career period that's really tough to navigate, it's also hard to even find the right kind of support. We see this almost like a sort of training wasteland where there's a lot of great early career management rotation type programs. And when you progress up to C-level positions, often you have access to accelerators, executive coaches, these much more exclusive type of programs. Yet there's very little available in this mid-career period. And it's a period where women in particular tend to get less support from their manager or supervisor as well. Furthermore, women in particular tend to have narrow circles available to them for support than do their male colleagues. And lastly, we know that while mentoring is actually really critical at this mid-career period to both address personal and the professional challenges, it's fundamentally broken for women and other underrepresented groups. Not only do they have less access to mentors, but when they do have mentoring, their mentors are less senior. They get different content that is less oriented towards career advancement. We know that increasingly men are more reticent to spend time one-on-one with their female colleagues as a result of the Me Too movement. This is a really big problem that we're starting to see in the resources that are being provided to women in these underrepresented groups. Let's dig even further into the data and see what it's saying about people in these mid-career periods. We've done some research on our own Ceresa community data, and we find that a really large number do still have high aspirations towards leadership. However, the problem starts to come in that they have much less confidence in their ability to get to leadership, and even less of a sense of a clear vision of what it's going to look like in their life and career to get to that kind of path. One of the most fundamental issues we see is that the kind of support that individuals need, the development goals they have, is really different than the feedback and support they're typically receiving in the workplace. So let's look at what individuals' own personal development goals are. We see that the top category is balance, wellness, and finding meaning, perhaps not that surprising. But coming in very close second to that is career advancement, so both short-term career planning and longer-term career guidance. The third bucket is interpersonal relationships, communications, and even confidence. And then we see a good number around parenting, personal and other community relationships, and of course, a little bit over around specific leadership, management skills, and other professional development skills. But when we compare that with the feedback they are getting, and this is from a full 360 review where we have thousands of participants, It's just a fundamental mismatch. Very little of the feedback is being provided around the topics of how to find more balance or think about your own wellness. Even smaller amount is focused on those career advancement questions, whereas the really vast number, almost half of all the feedback that is given, is in this question of interpersonal communications relationship piece. There's basically no feedback that's been given on helping on relationships outside of the workforce, and a really good focus on these more business skills around leadership, management, and professional development skills. When we look at the individual goal level, so breaking down another layer from those categories, the difference becomes even more apparent. Let's just look at what some of the differences are. We see that items, the top second and third item most commonly cited from individuals are those career items again, yet they're completely missing from the top 10 items that is being given as part of feedback from their colleagues. On the feedback that is given already, the first most common goal, improving your personal operating style, actually accounts for a full 15% of all the feedback, all the thousands of pieces of feedback that are given, and that's some kind of adjective used in describing it. So you're too friendly, you're too unfriendly, you're too direct, you're not direct enough. Some version of that kind of feedback is by far the most common feedback that's ever given. There's a couple of interesting pieces, which is the sort of vice versa of this, which are things that is given as feedback in the 360s that might actually be blind spots to the individuals, but still important in these transitions to leadership roles. The ones that I noticed in the top 10 are around the ability to think more strategically, taking more initiative, and learning how to delegate better. And so there's some things we can learn both ways on, but really making sure that we are at least meeting the needs that individuals themselves are identifying. Knowing that the kind of support you can get in mentoring is so important to both of the personal and professional challenges during this period, one of the things we've come up against at Ceresa is this pretty common narrative that only organic mentoring can work, that formal mentoring programs can never be impactful. Sheryl Sandberg, who obviously a lot of people look up to and is seen as an important role model for women in leadership, she came out and said that people must excel in order to get mentoring, and that we should stop telling people that they should try and go get mentoring to help them excel. I can understand how that worked for her, but our challenge is that it's hugely undemocratic. It really penalizes those people who don't already have access to the old boys club, who don't have the bank balance to go buy intensive coaching, or they didn't get to the Ivy League or don't have the world-class training programs professionally from early in their career that help them to start excelling. That's part of the mission that we're trying to solve at Ceresa. We know that this isn't just a social justice issue. We know that this is critical to you at your companies, both in this crisis situation as you look at how to support employees, but also longer term to help you continue to recruit talent, to continue driving retention of talent, promoting and creating these more diverse leadership teams overall, understanding that companies with greater diversity actually financially outperform their peers. So despite a lot of effort and resources being put into L&D programs, we aren't seeing them evolve fast enough to meet these kinds of challenges that are critical to diverse employees, but also in times like this crisis we're going through. First of all, the content has always been so particularly focused on professional skills and not being willing to address more personal issues that are outside the workforce, but actually disproportionately affect women and underrepresented groups. Secondly, delivery models have not evolved. Despite some other industries moving digital much more quickly, L&D has still had a heavily classroom-focused approach. We also see some bias in the way that content is created in a very generic way and assumed to be applicable to everybody, as opposed to addressing the specific needs of the individual. So with Ceresa, we've really looked at how to rethink learning and development programs, leadership programs. We see 5 core pillars to how programs should be designed that we've incorporated at Ceresa, but we hope are helpful as you think about your own programs. The first is how important it is to start with the self, for individuals to do that hard self-work of reflecting, thinking about their own challenges, their goals and aspirations. Even incorporating 360 feedback or having a coach help you reflect on what are those things you need help on. The second component is to take a really whole person approach, being willing to look at personal, interpersonal dynamics, not just professional skills, and recognizing that all those elements affect how a person shows up and their ability to perform in a certain work environment. The third component is creating something personalized that can really fit to their life. Both the content has to be highly relevant and even just in time to address both the big A agenda that they set maybe at the beginning of the year or beginning of a program, but also adapt to the specific challenges that come up on a timely basis, week to week or month to month, helping them navigate those situations. We think it's critical for programs to be convenient too, accessible at a time when it makes sense for the individual, when they're in a mindset to learn as well, not assuming it has to be on a Thursday morning at 8 a.m. or Friday at the happy hour time. We know these have to be democratically accessible. For us, it's important that these programs are both affordable and also scalable. And being virtual is a really great way to ensure that no matter where you're based geographically, you can have access to the best resources, the best fit for you of who you need to learn from. And finally, not to neglect it, last but not least, the importance of taking a data-driven approach to ensuring you're having impact. Collecting data in those early stages of the self-work helps you design content, understanding what individuals need to design the programs you're going to deliver. Tracking with the data, tracking the participation, tracking the satisfaction, even the impact over time will help you continue to refine and improve the programs that you're offering. Next up, Layne's going to talk about a couple of examples of how she's brought some of these principles to life in her own work.
So I'm very excited today to share 2 case studies with you of how I've applied human-centered design to address some of the challenges that you heard Anna talk about earlier. So the first case study I'd love to speak to talks a little bit about how we addressed just-in-time learning, personalization, and experimentation. So one of the challenges that we often see with leaders is they lack the skills and the confidence to have conversations that matter the most for their own development or for others, such as providing feedback or receiving feedback. Maybe it's around managing team culture and how they build high-performing teams, or tackling a tough conversation or issue. Our existing support was primarily delivered in multi-day classroom experiences, but what it lacked for our leaders and what we heard really clearly was it didn't always have the real-time continuous improvement mindset embedded within the learning. So an approach that we used, leveraging design thinking, was to really reorient ourselves as learning practitioners to build empathy with our leaders and understand the challenges from their point of view, and then understand the challenges from their team members' point of view. So through conducting empathy interviews with leaders and their team members, we gained a lot of insight into how leaders are perceiving their own skills compared to that of their peers or perhaps of their own leaders, and saw a really big gap. And through that process, we also really looked at leveraging insights from diverse team members and having a very equitable approach to how we identified and selected leaders. Now, those more traditional programs I was referencing oftentimes were nomination-based. And so what we wanted to also explore was that through nomination-based programs, without having really clear criteria that didn't embed bias within the criteria, we were potentially missing a large segment of our population. Our solution, after conducting some empathy interviews, and this is a quarterly offering that we provide, was we now create practice labs where we are focused on helping a leader really think about and focus on their inner work that they may need to do in order to lead others more effectively. We typically choose one question, and that question guides the design for 1 to 3 activities that take place over 30 to 90 minutes. But those activities are 100% peer learning. So as leaders come to this experience, which happens very much synced up to things that are happening in our talent cycle. So as an example, when we're preparing for performance reviews, we create a venue where leaders can come and just talk about what do they anticipate, some of those challenging feedback moments or experience or review insights they need to share with their team members, and how do they prepare for that in order to have a more effective conversation. They have a chance to practice over that 90 minutes with other peers and get immediate feedback and insights into how the message they're trying to deliver might be received. And the really exciting thing about these particular venues for this experimentation lab is that what we've heard from leaders is they often stay in contact with the people that they're partnering with during those experimentation labs for a quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters, and so they're using each other as a peer coaching group outside of the experience itself. As Anna spoke to, that really helps people personalize what do they need when they need it, and they have a broader support network for how they are getting some of that much needed leadership development that is really in those times of need that don't sync up with a formal program that we're offering. In the first year of offering this experience, we've had about 1,300 leaders attend a lab, and what's been exciting is we've been able to ask and measure how many of them have been able to take something away from that lab and apply it in their quote-unquote real world. In that year, what we heard was that over 70% of our leaders reported they did try a new behavior and are actively practicing it, which has been really exciting as a pivot from some of our previous programs where individuals struggled to maybe make that leap to the real world and apply what they had learned from others. Okay, so the second example I'd love to share with you really addresses some of the other challenges that Anna spoke to. So certainly starting with yourself, starting with the whole self and the whole person, and really fitting into where someone is at in their life. So one of the particular approaches where I've used human-centered design is to look at goal setting within an organization that takes a much more integrated, holistic approach that acknowledges the really critical importance of alignment between someone's personal values, their intentions, and their goals, and where they are in that particular chapter of their life or perhaps their career. So in the organization I was working at the time, one of our challenges was that our traditional goal setting approach really focused on SMART goals or using OKRs, which are fantastic when you're talking about a work goal or maybe a project-based goal. But for us, we're failing to address how values and feelings can be really powerful accelerators, or in some cases barriers, to goal achievement. So we recognized an opportunity to enhance our overall organizational culture by creating a really specific learning experience that reinforced for all of our leaders, 97% of whom were women, the importance of looking at goal setting and career goal setting specifically as a whole life exercise versus just a work exercise. So what we created as a result of these empathy interviews and doing some really rapid prototyping with our leaders was an immersive experience that was called Goals with Soul. And the intention of this Goals with Soul learning experience was to really help our leader population focus on, if you are setting a goal that is based on what other people think you should be doing, what maybe lacks in that or maybe what's not motivating versus how do you want to feel when you achieve these goals. This facilitated session included learning objectives that were focused on how do you start to identify your core values, how do you explore like the feelings and perceptions that may come along with goals and goal setting, especially in relation to ambition, external pressures, perhaps a drive for approval and success, and then to really start small and identify a few goals or intentions that are aligned with your values first, and then creating a plan to support those goals or intentions. And one of the biggest parts of, I would say, kind of the wrapper of this experience for our leaders was to also sort of take the burden off of them of feeling like they're alone in this challenge. And so we were able to really create an experience that was focused on creating connection, generating commitment, and engaging their support network. So through this experience, we had about 300 leaders complete the workshop, which was part of a 3-day leadership conference. But 99% of those attendees established 2 to 3 whole self goals that became part of their annual performance goals. We also saw our leaders take what they had experienced personally in terms of identifying values and syncing them up with their goals. We saw a pretty large percentage of our leaders take that concept back to their store teams and use that with their leadership teams or even individual contributors to start to explore, how do your goals align with your values? What about this particular part of our business might fuel you in terms of connecting to your values and giving you something bigger to reach for beyond just the results we're trying to achieve within the store? And Anna, I will turn it back over to you.
So before we close, let me just address how we've translated these 5 core leadership principles into the program that we offer at Ceresa to give you some more examples. The first work that our participants do is a 2-month phase called the Aspire phase, when they're working on the 360 feedback, they're doing a lot of reflection, they have sessions with it one-to-one with an executive coach. They actually write a much broader life aspiration statement, as well as clarifying their specific goals to go through with mentoring. The second phase, which is really critical to our success and the impact we can have, is the matching phase, where we use a lot of the data we collect from that self-work phase, our data acquisition phase, to match based on more than 70 data points, really taking into account who is the right person that can be the guide, be the mentor to this individual. Yes, based on their professional aspirations, but also their personal context and the specific things they want to work on. The heart of our program is a 6-month grow phase when the individual has multiple sessions with that mentor, being able to work through some of the big topics they have, but working equally on things that are coming up month to month and showing up to each of those sessions really prepared and intentional to get the most out of it. After that phase, all of our participants have a reflect phase where they're able to get back with their executive coach, think about progress they've made, but also set intentions going forward again too. And last but not least, tracking and understanding the impact you have is really critical. We know that the individuals going through the program are seeing a much greater sense of empowerment and confidence in achieving their aspirations. They're feeling like their whole lives are more in balance. They're getting the support to make cope those changes. Even now, they're feeling the support to navigate through this crisis, and they're seeing promotions, professional skills advancing. And so many companies we're working with are seeing high levels of retention, high net promoter score, satisfaction with their companies, and helping them really develop a cadre of much more diverse leaders for the future. Before we close, as well as saying thank you for your time, and we're happy to stay here and take questions and discuss with you, I wanted to just note that, again, we understand that things are changing fast, and so many companies are looking for different kinds of offerings. We actually surveyed some of our community about what they need right now. And the two most overwhelming things were, one, access to much more affordable leadership programs that they can support more of their employees with. And number two, which really has been inspiring to us, is they're looking to add much more whole person resources, mental health offerings to support their employee bases. We'd be delighted to help you if you're looking for any of these things, but really applaud the work in moving in that direction and really hope that these changes outlive the COVID crisis that we're all going through. Thank you. Hi, can you all see me and hear me now? I can see Layne as well. Okay.
I can hear you, Anna.
Great, thank you. Yes, it's tough to
hear
other people. Yeah. So a couple of questions have been coming in that we'll start with, and if folks have other questions, we'll go to those. I see a couple on the Q&A and a couple on the chat as well. So let me start with a couple of questions that have come through from Caitlin, and just as I'm not totally sure if everyone can see them, but let me just give a quick overview of what the questions are. So the first one is, well, more a comment that mentoring is actually important at all levels in an organization. Everyone can still have that sort of growth mindset, and that not all your mentors have to be more senior in a company. And Caitlin, 100% agree with you. You know, people who we work with and mentor and go are pretty much actually in all stages in their career. We have a focus primarily in the mid-level, but people are interested at either ends. And actually, funnily enough, one of the criteria we look for as we're bringing mentors into our community is we actually screen them for a bit of a growth mindset, and think that our best mentors are those that actually are coming to this hoping to learn just as much as the person that they're paired with. So totally agree with that. And then Caitlin had just one other question around individuals going into the Ceresa program, if they do it once or multiple times, and how we pair people. Most people just do the program once, but we launched 2 years ago, so we'll see how that changes over time. We have companies that are putting different cohorts through over multiple times, but most individuals have only gone through it once at this point. We're launching a sort of ongoing, completely on-demand platform, partly in response to what's going on now, that will give people the ability to have that really long-term journey. In terms of matching and how we pair mentors and mentees, first of all, it's my favorite part of what we do. It's not a completely automated algorithm. I still sit in every matching session every week, because it's really the magic is in the matching. Like, we can have all the structure and all the curriculum we like, but if you're not learning from somebody that A, that you're going to connect with, and B, who has relevant experience for you, then it's not going to work. So we take a very data-driven approach. So we have, because everything goes through our platform, we have at least 70 data points on each person by the time they're ready for matching, because they've gone through all of this self-work and goal setting exercise. So we use all of that. Similarly, our mentors have given us data that's beyond their LinkedIn profile, but around their professional, personal sort of lived experiences that they've either personally had or feel comfortable mentoring with. So it ends up being much more forward looking. So we're looking at people's professional aspirations, not just what their current role is. And we look very holistically. So, you know, just to give some examples, this is not just HR manager to HR executive. We're really looking very specifically, obviously, at function and industry is often relevant, but we're really looking at what specific challenges they're going through. On a personal level, we've got people who are, I mean, not surprisingly, people who are pregnant and haven't had a supervisor or someone that more senior to them who has gone through that and they've seen how it works. So that's a really important component. But we've also had people going through a divorce. And this isn't therapy, but having some understanding for what that does is actually really relevant context. People moving to a new geography or switching to a completely different career track and wanting people who've got that kind of empathy too. Let's see, other in the chat. And you've got our, I know Kate from my team posted mine and Layne's LinkedIn on there. So we're happy to connect with anybody after this as well. What other questions are coming up? I don't think I'm missing any. Let me know, Kate or Layne, if you see others that I am somehow missing.
I don't see anything right now.
I haven't seen any more.
I guess one thing to just hear from people is whether you have found like effective mentoring programs and what's been the differentiator and what works and what doesn't, if people are on and listening and can sort of share their input a little bit. Oh, unique differences with Gen Z. Haha, yes, Kerry. So Kerry Smith asked, are we seeing unique differences with Gen Z? Yes, a little, we are. I mean, first of all, a huge appetite with these kinds of things, for these kinds of programs. We know that Gen Z both want to invest in themselves, but also see, frankly, both diversity, but also these kind of self-development opportunities, growth opportunities at companies to be the second most important thing they look for in choosing a company. And second only to healthcare benefits, actually. So it raises above even salary for some Gen Z. And then the other thing that we're seeing with folks of that end of millennial into that generation, it is so much focus around purpose, values. But frankly, I think we see that through a lot of our population, which has been, I guess, a little surprising to me in general, how heavily that weighs on people, the need to really understand why they're doing what they're doing, which, you know, we talk about that being like a classic thing for millennials and now even more for Gen Z, but we see that actually more than I expected to throughout so many people. Yeah. How about you, Layne? Do you want to add to that?
I would agree. I think the things that we're seeing in that sort of values or purpose or connection to meaning, I also see spikes sort of mid-career as well for individuals as they are getting a little bit more comfortable and kind of progressing up that ladder, is just even asking questions of themselves of how does this connect to what's more important to me from a values perspective, and what are some of the trade-offs as maybe I get promoted to a director, senior director, VP role, and am I willing to make those trade-offs? Is that still what's most important? Especially in scenarios where they've set those goals early in career and maybe not had as much intentionality about continuing to revisit, like, is that still true for me in terms of aspiration?
Yeah. Okay, couple more
we've got a question from Mike.
Yep.
What are biggest mistakes you've seen with mentoring programs as companies try to scale them?
Yeah, great question. A couple of the most common things that we have seen are, I mean, the first one is totally understand. I mean, they're all understandable because it's actually really hard. I mean, we have a team and a resource and invested in technology just to do this well. So I get why it's hard to do it internally, because I think it's largely due to being under-resourced, actually. It's the root cause of it. But what we see I think the biggest problem is that we see time and time again is really good intentions. People will get matched. That I'll talk about matching in a second, and they'll have the first or second session, and then they never continue. Like the end amount of engagement compared to what is intended is very low. And having, that was a large part of what we were looking at in all the research of how we designed the Ceresa program. And a couple of the things that came up underneath that are around, number one, not actually having very clear roles and expectations up front. And there's a little bit of a gendered element here. We heard from a lot of women in particular that they felt uncomfortable continuing to ask for the time. Often it's the mentee who is expected to continue to drive the program, but they felt that it was almost an imposition on the people, even though they'd been matched formally. And so one of the things we wanted to do at Ceresa was take that out, that kind of awkwardness out of it, and just say, look, this is the cadence, this is how many is expected, and then it's sort of in a box, and so it's much easier, but also the ability to actually track it. Because, for so many people, it's someone like Layne who's got a full-time job doing all these other programs, who's then putting this mentoring thing on the side. So their ability to chase everyone down, track that it's happening, it's really tough. And I think then just the other thing is, it is the matching. It's the ability, I think the best, most programs literally just have volunteers, or it's like, hey, we're going to match you with someone in the senior leadership, and it's a little bit sort of just thrown together. I think occasionally there's some opt-in that's allowed, or I think the best case we see is typically, okay, you're an HR manager, we're going to pay you with HR executive. But they're not forward-looking, so it's not taking into account where someone actually wants to go in their career. And I think this whole person element is missing so much. It's so focused on your professional skills as opposed to what are the biggest barriers to you progressing in your career, recognizing you as a whole person, and therefore matching you with someone who has that. Yeah. Okay, a couple of other questions I see about Ceresa's program. Let me answer the quick one, which is from Kerry Smith about our matches. All of our matches within Ceresa are to external mentors. So we don't go in and essentially run the mentoring program for a company. We have a community of mentors that we continue to build up, who are all technically volunteers. So what we do is create a whole program actually for our mentor community. So we do a lot of ongoing professional development, networking opportunities, even we have people come to us looking for executive board positions. Our mentor community is pretty senior, 75% of VP and above. And they all do this, to give back in a much more sort of efficient and impactful way through a structured program, but also for that ongoing community and development. So they're all external. In an ideal world, this should supplement an internal program. I'm not saying internal mentoring and specifically sponsoring isn't really helpful, but we've seen a lot of value add by having that ability to have a little bit of objectivity, confidentiality, and match with someone just a great fit for you that's not necessarily restricted by being in your same office or company. Another couple questions. How do we integrate the Ceresa program with leadership learning topics and programs? So I guess, is it Mara Kay who asked, it's a good question. I can answer it. I'm not totally sure which way you intend it. So let me just break out two pieces, and then you can let me know if I'm not answering the question as well. Feel free to put another comment in. So within Ceresa, we have some specific leadership learning topics that we also bring up that sort of are essentially on-demand content that supplement the existing sort of self-work, coaching, and mentoring curriculum. So we know some of the biggest topics that come up, and actually we're continuing now, especially in response to crisis, to add other topics about leading through crisis, but also even some personal health, mental health. We're even adding like a nutrition for leadership and performance, like this whole range of topics. It's just a much broader leadership library, but it's not like LinkedIn Learning, like this whole database. There's actually we still think having the interactive component of self-work is really important, along with having expert instruction and storytelling from mentors. But we have those within Ceresa. At companies, the way we integrate with existing companies' leadership programs depends a lot on the company. We're actually just talking to a big private equity company that's based down here in Austin, Texas, where we are. And we're live now planning how to integrate it. Because our program is very structured, right? This is a 9-month program. We don't change the structure of the program, and that's one of the reasons it can be very affordable. Is it's not like this customized thing for everybody. But what we're talking to them about is putting it, we're using it with their high potential talent from across all of their portfolio companies and integrating in their existing programming. It will sort of run alongside it. We're planning when's the right time to launch this, so it will be sort of in parallel to the right thing. But then as some of their existing topics they're planning to cover, like one is around leadership and leading teams and leading through change. So some of the content we already have, we're talking to them about how do we leverage that existing content so they can talk about it as that group session as well. And a couple other things we do. Most companies put cohorts through the Ceresa program. We can take individuals, but most people put a cohort through. And so it's really nice to have a sort of structured cohort discussion that goes alongside, and those peer groups find a lot of value because they're often cross-functional within an organization, sort of going alongside the program. And we've even paired in other situations internal sort of journey with a sponsor. So you can have, whether it's your supervisor or someone else as your sponsor, you have somebody that you have these touch points with alongside the Ceresa program to have those ongoing discussions about what you're learning, how that's gonna show up. Any other thoughts for you, Layne? You've seen mentoring programs in different places. Any other, on just looking at the range of questions that have come in, any other thoughts you have?
Yeah, I think that one of the questions was around maybe some of the pitfalls or barriers to scaling. And I think one of the things I've seen just being a challenge, and I think it's one of the advantages that you described earlier around really taking into account the needs of diverse, whether it is women, whether it is other dimensions of difference or diversity, really being able to tailor mentoring partnerships to what some of those more specific needs might be, given unique needs, personalization, preferences. And that has definitely been one of the things that I think has made it challenging in other organizations I've worked at to scale a mentoring program effectively, because oftentimes the assumption is a mentor is a mentor is a mentor versus really that personalization component you spoke to.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And even assuming that, right? Like we have some people who have, Ceresa actually started out, we had an initial focus on women, and then we realized that what we were doing was just democratizing access to these great resources, and plenty of other people, particularly more diverse employees, also needed that same access. So there was no reason why it was only women that should benefit from the program. And the way it's been designed is it gets personalized to each individual, so anyone can benefit from it. But one of the reasons we moved beyond just women was because of this. We realized that having this assumption that gender is always the most important lens was actually not serving everybody as well as we could, particularly at points of intersectionality. There were women in our program who literally said, I've only worked with female leaders. I'd love to have a male mentor, or, a whole range of other points of identity that were more important for people as well, that it felt like we were neglecting. So I do think that's a piece that's not sufficiently designed into programs or mentor pools, or, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, good questions. I love having these discussions. It always pushes my thinking a little bit. We're happy to stay on a few minutes, and if there's other questions that come up, happy to take them. And if anyone has questions, we're always happy to chat offline. You have my LinkedIn. If anyone personally wants to reach out, my email is just anna@ceresa.com. I'm always happy to, even if it's you're setting up your own mentoring program, want some thoughts or tips, we're always happy to share some of the things we've been learning. Yeah, thank you. I've seen some thanks from you. Thanks everyone for joining, for the great questions. And Layne, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, thank you for everyone who joined us today.
Yeah. Hoping everyone stays healthy. All right. Thank you, Layne. I think I'm gonna
Thank you,
drop off, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Talk soon.
Thanks to all the CLO team as well for your help.